Jonathan Hoenig and John Layfield are joining us here. Now, they follow the markets, and I want to sort of marry what we're watching now, crazy as it seems, waiting to hear from Al Franken, but in the middle of this, waiting to see whether this gets in the way, doesn't get in the way. They move forward on tax cuts, get a vote done by the end of the week, maybe this weekend. Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, Neil, it certainly could derail those tax cuts, and that's what worries me as an investor. It's been a great year for stocks, and we know it's going to be a record-setting Black Friday and now Cyber Monday. But so much, I think, of the great rally this year has been powered by the expectation of just that, terrific tax cuts. And we're running out of time now here towards the end of the year. So I think a lot of investors are watching Amazon right now. They're watching Cyber Monday sales, but they're also watching what's happening on Capitol Hill.
John Layfield, these charges back and forth, and who embarrasses whom, as Connell was saying, I mean, there's enough of this to go around on both sides for the time being, and you just have to interpret whose are more embarrassing, but there's a lot of it going around. How is that likely to affect the tenor going into next year, the midterm elections? Obviously, markets follow those closely as well.
I think it's got to affect it. Look, when you're talking about these tax cuts, you're talking about a potential looming government shutdown, which I don't think is going to happen. We've had 18 funding gap since 1976, the Budget and Appropriations Act. 7 of those resulted in government shutdowns. It was all a result of the Democrats fighting with the Republicans over something.
You're a genius, but we should explain that the government technically would start running out of ways to pay its bills or money as early as the second week of December. So they've got to cobble together something to keep the lights on, right?
Correct. And when you're arguing about the midterm elections, this is what I was trying to get to, was the fact that every time in the past, these 7 government shutdowns since 76, you've had Republicans fighting Democrats, and they're trying to figure out who has a better position. They're all ideological battles. This is simply Republicans fighting Republicans. This is unprecedented. That the one party controls both chambers of Congress, the administration, and they can't get any bills passed. And I think this has to hurt the Republicans. They promised repeal and replace. They promised tax cuts by January 4th, by the August recess. They haven't delivered on anything. I think necessary to their survival, they have to deliver something.
Jonathan Hoenig, the markets could be supremely disappointed if these don't turn out. Not that these tax cuts are perfect, far from it, but they're the only game in town. So play that out for me.
Yeah, I mean, Neil, there's 2 sides of the coin. One says that, if the markets haven't been perplexed and miffed by terrible terrorist acts this year, which they haven't, maybe the tax cuts aren't such a big deal. But, they come amid, I believe, a slightly worsening macroeconomic picture. Credit card delinquencies are nearing a post-crisis high. And although the market's gone up this year, so have people credit card balances. So people are getting a little more comfortable now, I think, with the euphoria. And of course, the president's talked about that. Whether he should be credited with it or not is another story. But what worries me is not getting some of the expected tax cuts, regulatory reform, and a worsening financial situation for everyday Americans that could be troublesome in 2018.
Connell, imagine if we get the tax cuts, we get through all these personal, ethical crises in both parties, and the markets still go down.
Well, it could, right? I mean, they have gone nothing but up. So at some point, if you just want
in other words, they get what they want and sell on that.
Well, their sell on the news is one of the oldest sayings on Wall Street, and because at some point, that's one of the most perplexing things. I mean, Jonathan or John, they know far more about this, I guess, than we would. But the idea that
that's kind of debatable. But I love them both. They're geniuses.
Trying to be nice.
They're geniuses both.
They both are. They both are. Especially Layfield. He's a lot nothing wrong. Just the idea that we haven't had any kind of a real correction. We haven't pulled back, and everybody tells you that's healthy. So you're right. Maybe. By the way, if that happens, and if we sell off a little bit, it's not the end of the world. I mean, we've got.
It is not. It is not. Johnny, though, Hoenig, I'm talking about here. Do you get a sense that if companies then take advantage of this lower rate to take money from abroad or whatever they're getting and then much lower tax cut, and they just plow it back into their stock, buying their stock or increasing the dividend, which they're free to do, is that going to be deemed a disappointment where Democrats can seize on that and say, aha, this is what we warned you about?
Well, yes, Neil. I think, unfortunately, the problem with taking credit when the market's up is that when the market's down, you have to wear that blame as well. So I think to Connell's point, he's right. I mean, if we get those tax cuts and the market sells off, you'll see Democrats, I'm sure, blaming Republicans for that. I mean, my perspective is that both elements of the Republican factions are right now. Deficits are important, but tax cuts are also important. Perhaps working together, that ultimately is what the market's going to want, Neil. People to have more of their money to today to spend to invest, and also future generations when it comes to that escalating national debt. So being more fiscally responsible, it's good for the economy, it's good for the stock market, it's good for every single American. To John's point, now is the time for Republicans to finally make that happen.
All right, and we're a long way from seeing them do just that.